Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is David Novak. This is going to be a rather desultory video, as many of them are. The last video I made mention of Klaus Makela, conductor designate of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. And I mentioned that in my recent book I had written a poem which makes mention of him, and I thought I would read it to you and then take it from there. This poem is titled Makela Conducting. This is a sort of a political screed, if you will, talking about the political situation in today's United States of America. All of these poems were posted as individual YouTube videos at the early part of this year, 2025. Makela Conducting. The constitutional form of government, partially fallen to fascism beneath a would-be autocrat and man whose bent seeks to drive Western culture to its death. He has strived mightily to sever from its European heritage this land he hopes to rule, and wants beneath his thumb culture and art in homage to his brand. Amidst civic decay, by this man wrought, aided by his cabal, I heard Chicago's Symphony Orchestra to tease my thought from manufactured crises and farragos. Contralto Wiebke Lemkuhl singing Mahler rescued me from dispatches on the dollar. We rely upon art to take our minds off of the pecuniary matters of the day. Of course, the current regime is only about pecuniary matters and wants to destroy and decimate culture wherever he finds it. I would imagine this poem was written or posted at least on April 24th, 2025. I would imagine perhaps this is around the time that Trump went public with his objective of destroying the Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts. I don't have clear memories on the timeline anymore, but it is clear that he wants to dismantle all of the cultural institutions that we have, just as much as he wants to dismantle institutions of higher education and institutions of journalism, that kind of thing, as well as now the public health infrastructure. So that is how things are going in the United States. And from the beginning, he has expressed a virulent hatred of the city of Chicago. And I think one of those reasons is because even though we may not seem so at first glance, we are something of a cultured city. We do not have the highfalutin Broadway shows of New York City, but we have traditionally a vibrant theater community here, as well as all of the other arts find their place in Chicago. I pulled out some old issues of the American Scholar. So one is from spring of 1991, and the earlier one is from winter, and the later one is winter of 1992. They had a cover price of $5.75, and I've held on to these because they both contain articles that have meant a lot to me. When I would see an article by Bernard Lewis, I would buy the issue to be sure. Behind the Rushdie Affair and Who Needs Saddam Hussein. Both very good articles, probably due for a reread now that I have pulled these up. These were edited by Joseph Epstein. I wrote an essay about Joseph Epstein, which used to be up at my website. The website no longer exists. Now, if you want to see it, you have to get my book, Lit, Crit, Politics, and Poetics. You probably can find it in an abbreviated version at the site whereat it was first published, if that site still exists, but I don't remember the name of the site. And I don't count on things on the internet lasting forever. And I don't know if the Wayback Machine is searchable, but I will put a link to this in the description box and to the other book if you wish. That is neither here nor there. But Joseph Epstein is a bit of a, I was going to say snivelly man, but I think the word that he would prefer is snob. He's a bit of a snob. Snobs don't fare well today in the public discourse, but he has a whole book about snobbery, and he was something of a literary snob, I would say. A very good writer, although generally on the facile end of the spectrum. It is hard to say what sort of lasting value his writings will hold. But I swear I wish somebody could get a complete set of the Issues of American Scholar, which he edited during his tenure there. And I think it was a good number of years because the issues were brilliant. At the time, I was probably making $7 an hour, and then from which taxes would be taken out. So the price of $5.75 did not make it an easy purchase for me. So I was not a regular consumer of this periodical. Now I wish that I had been, because over the years I have realized that so many of these other articles are just really top-notch stuff. And the one that's in my mind is this one by Amadeus and Mozart by A. Peter Brown. And I wonder if A. Peter Brown has a book out, which is a compilation of essays. He talks about the film, which popularized Mozart. And I thought that I would read a little bit from that essay. Amadeus and Mozart. For the respect his works have commanded of musicians and the popularity they have enjoyed among wider audiences, he is probably the most admired composer in the history of Western music, unquote. With this appraisal, the New Grove Dictionary of Music and Musicians, published in 1980, begins its magisterial article on Beethoven. More than a decade later, one might not apply this statement to the Teutonic Goliath, but to the David of Mozart. Not only is this year, 1991, the bicentennial of Mozart's death, it also comes at a time when his pristine classical image has become the preferred taste over Beethoven's more extroverted expression. Just a footnote, this year, 2025, is the bicentennial of the death of Salieri, a contemporary of Mozart's. I'm just going to read at random here. Well, not at random, I've picked things out, but I'm not reading continuously. This popularization of Mozart did not come from the opera houses or concert halls, its most direct beneficiaries, but from the stage and screen. More than any other factor, the Mozart mania of the 1980s was initiated by Peter Shaffer's play Amadeus. It and the subsequent film, directed by Milos Forman, did more for Mozart's case than anything else in the 200 years since the composer's death. Amadeus ran in London, Washington, and New York, and was translated into German and Hungarian, among other languages. As it entered the repertoire of the Bundtheater in Vienna and the Nemzeti Színház in Budapest. Schaffer continually revised the stage version with, in his words, a nearly obsessive pursuit of clarity, structural order, and drama. One of the faults which I, Schaffer, believe existed in the London version was simply that Salieri has too little to do with Mozart's ruin, unquote. For the film version, Schaffer and Forman again revised the script, not only for the new medium, but also for a larger and less sophisticated audience. Fictional ornament understates the gulf between what was the invention of the authors and historical truth. No doubt both Schaffer and Forman knew the facts of Mozart's biography and were even familiar with some of the historical controversies or controversies. Their metamorphosis of Mozart's life was analogous to Da Ponte's transformation of Beaumarchais' play The Marriage of Figaro into an operatic libretto. The length was made to fit the time frame of the medium, the number of characters was reduced, and the situations streamlined and combined. Yet the settings and motivations of the characters might still be recreations of 18th century life. If Schaffer and Forman had accomplished or even intended this goal, much of the power of their film would have been diminished for today's audience. Motivations, goals, and feelings, or at least the way they were expressed and retained by men and women of Mozart's day, would have been decidedly different from ours. For example, Wolfgang and Constance Mozart had 6 children brought to full term, and only 2 survived into adulthood, a ratio common for the time. If their reaction to the death of each child were on the same scale as the reaction to a child's death in the 1990s, they would have been in an almost perpetual state of mourning during the decade of their marriage. Though titled Amadeus, it is the character of Antonio Salieri, 1750 to 1825, who remains at the center of Schaffer's work. Salieri held high posts in the Viennese imperial musical establishment from 1774 until 1824. In his last years, he suffered from senility. Among the rumors circulating in Vienna around 1824 was one saying that Salieri had said he poisoned Mozart. The tale reached Beethoven and many others. In 1825, Salieri's 2 attendants attested that they had never heard such words from their charge, and a friend of Mozart's physician reported that Wolfgang had died of a fever that was epidemic at that time in Vienna. From an unproved premise, Schaffer developed this, the central character in Amadeus, as one obsessed by and murderously jealous of Mozart's genius. Mozart's widow, by the way, fanned the flames of that rumor. Though Salieri never achieved historical greatness, he was rightfully a highly respected and successful composer whose ability to provide operas for the court and to administer its musical establishment cannot be questioned. In contrast, Salieri's music performed in Amadeus is simple-minded and unworthy of his true abilities. There is no question that Mozart's improvisational and performance skills were exceptional. Salieri's remain unknown. However, by showing Salieri as a barely competent musician, the disparity of musical talent is deepened, thereby furthering Schaeffer's dramatic plan. Salieri's music may never have achieved immortality, but it was always correct, skillful, and appropriate. I have to say that that exaggeration points to a weakening of Schaeffer's dramatic plan in the long term. He goes for the easy oomph, so to speak. When you consider Shakespeare's portrayal of Shylock, I think you can see how a master who does not pull any punches would treat the subject. And then just finally, it's quite a long piece, and I initially had thought that I would read the entirety of it. I'll just read the conclusion now. The Amadeus version of Mozart's last days and interment are a combination of imagination and discredited tradition. Imagination dominates the Schaeffer and Foreman film version of Mozart's last days, where Salieri's attendance at a performance of the Magic Flute on October 13, 1791, is placed in time close to Mozart's death on December 5th. Schaeffer's version has Salieri assisting Mozart with the Requiem during a brief final illness. In actuality, Mozart's widow pursued at least 3 composers to complete Mozart's last work before settling on Franz Xaver Süssmayr as the collaborator, and the final illness lasted for 3 weeks, not a matter of hours. It was Constanze and her family who lovingly cared for him, an irony that would never have been appreciated by his father and sister. Mozart's funeral and burial were arranged by the Baron Gottfried von Swieten, who adhered to the Josephian burial guidelines and was cognizant of the deceased's financial situation. Amadeus presents a probably accurate picture of the burial. To today's eyes, the dumping of a bagged body into a communal grave must seem the ultimate insult, but it must be stressed that in 1791, this was the burial experienced by about 85% of Vienna's population. It was the norm, not an interment reserved only for the impoverished. Amadeus is but one of several recent attempts to exploit the continued fascination with Mozart during the last 230 years. 2 recent widely read books also freely interpret Mozart's biography and psyche. Wolfgang Hildesheimer's Mozart and Francis Carr's Mozart and Constanze. Hildesheimer provides many insights with his close readings of the letters, but his speculations about Mozart's love life and his emotional detachment from the world around him have little support. He views the man's expression as artificial and insensitive, erroneously measuring Mozart against today's expected modes of reaction to given situations. Unfamiliar with recent research, He supports some of the old fictions and adds some of his own. Like Amadeus, his Mozart is a fascinating character, and the work contains penetrating insights together with many wrong-headed interpretations. Another dilettante biographer, Francis Carr, also gives the impression of a search for historical truth by using documents and by thanking the learned men of the Mozarteum in Salzburg for their assistance. Carr revives the poisoning hypothesis, accusing not Salieri but Franz Hofdemmel because of an affair manufactured by Carr that Mozart had with Hofdemmel's wife Magdalena, one of his piano students. Hofdemmel, days after Mozart's death, disfigured his wife and then committed suicide. While the sorry fate of the Hofdemmels is true, the only additional connection to be made with Mozart is that he was a Masonic brother and creditor of the composer. Otherwise, only the coincidence of time and place can be made between Mozart's death and Hofdemmel's suicide. Carr's book is nothing but tabloid biography masquerading under documentation. Amadeus, the play and movie, as well as the books by Hildesheimer and Carr, derived their success from the unquestionable fascination Mozart holds for us today. Without the name of Mozart, the deep interest in these artifacts of our own culture would not exist. For those who want letters, memoirs, and other primary sources in order to make their own interpretation, these are readily available, but they cannot be taken as just the facts. For nearly every writer of letters and memoirs, as well as the purveyors of rumors, had his own agendas and beliefs. It is from the documents themselves and their interpretation that the Mozartian mythologies flourished. Why does Mozart command so much attention? Perhaps it stems from the eternally misguided effort to understand the man behind the music. Although Mozart's music is often recognized as universal, it has received varying interpretations of its essential meaning. For example, critical opinion of the Symphony No. 40 in G minor, K 550, is one of total admiration, but its character has remained elusive. Robert Schumann found it classical in the strict sense, full of Grecian lightness and grace. Alfred Einstein thought it a fatalistic piece of chamber music. Jens Peter Larsen believed it was not the expression of a private mood. Robbins Landon stated that it belongs to a series of works revealing the downside of Mozart's manic tendencies, while Jack Westrup found in it the spirit of opera buffa. Probably no work of the symphonic canon elicits such a wide range of effective reactions from knowledgeable critics. But perhaps it is this variety of reactions to his music that explains the varied interpretations of the person. Perhaps it is only in this sense that the biographies with their explanations of the man parallel the receptions of the music. While one can attempt to set the historical record straight, Schaeffer's and Foreman's Salieri had it right on one count. The phenomenon of Mozart transcends explanation. So, again, that is from an essay by A. Peter Brown that was printed in the American Scholar in winter of 1992. And it has stuck with me. And that is in the forefront of my mind today because I got to hear the most magnificent performance of Salieri's opera, Falstaff. Chicago Opera Theater has been performing operas for a long time, and they try nowadays to take lesser performed works. This is a Chicago premiere, and it was great to get the chance to hear Salieri's work. I am not an opera buff, not to mention buffa, but I, early on in my career, such as it were, did work for opera companies, and so I had exposure to various operas. In fact, my memory was jogged in the pre-concert talkback when the artistic director of Chicago Opera Theater mentioned an earlier performance which had been done, and it so happens it was one that I had worked on of another opera done out of Shakespeare's Falstaff. It was The Merry Wives of Windsor by Otto Nicolai, and I have great memories of that. This was the year 1990, and I worked on most of these plays. Lakme by Delibes and Carousel by Rogers and Hammerstein. But the Merry Wives of Windsor was memorable because it was the first and only time. It is a combination of opera and dialogue, so very much along the lines of the operettas that I was involved with a lot, like Zarzuelas. And there was one rousing scene, and I was backstage, an assistant to the stage manager, I believe. Don't quote me on that, I can't remember. And the lead, or one of the leads, it was a rousing sort of carousal scene with all of these flagons and benches and uproarious wordplay, I think. And the principal forgot his line. He froze. He went blank. And the stage manager was yelling to him what his line was, and he didn't hear her. He just froze. And he said, "I'm sorry, we have to take it again from the top." Something like that, and he did. Just a very memorable time at Chicago Opera Theater under the stewardship of Alan Stone. And then there was an interim of some guy named Dickies or something, who nobody seemed to like very much. And now under this new gentleman, it seems to be reviving again. In the old days, Chicago Opera Theater's niche was to perform the classic operas in English translation. And I loved that. I thought that was a great niche to occupy. Nowadays, they have foregone that and prefer to mount less known operas. And with this level of quality, I cannot complain. The Merry Wives of Windsor was 1990, so that's 35 years ago, which is hard to believe, but we performed in the, or they performed in the Athenaeum, and it was not a great space. I'm not saying that today's Studebaker is a great space either, but theater in Chicago and musical theater in Chicago has come a long way in those years. Falstaff has, I think, 3 bass baritone parts. And in the old days, you would be lucky if you found one that was as good as any of these. It was really quite good. And the thing that astounds me is that we have all of this in Chicago, and we have had such. And Chicago is fairly unique among the big cities. I think in New York it's difficult to see these productions at a reasonable price or free, whereas in Chicago, generally it's easily done in one way or another. As I say, I used to work for Chicago Opera Theater, but I was always the guy that they called at the last minute because they needed somebody for some reason or other. I had a connection with the stage manager, not with the company itself. But this is what Trump and his MAGA cohort detest about Chicago, that we have art such as this that gets performed regularly, and art which can be interpreted in a variety of different ways. The Republican movement wants there to be only one single interpretation of any fact, and that is the interpretation espoused by the BMFIC, as we say, or the big cheese, if you will, of the would-be dictator. And art has never answered to the whims of dictators. And so I think about our theater community was decimated during the time of COVID, and it seems to be coming back. On my ice watch, I patrolled with a woman who has done some theater directing in Chicago, and she assured me that theater is coming back. I do not go to theater anymore unless it is musical theater of one form or another. And how did this guy characterize Salieri's work? I doubt I'll find it now. Well, he said that basically that Salieri was pretty good. I think my reaction to the music is that technically there was nothing that Mozart could do that Salieri could not do. It is just simply that Mozart had that little extra bit of genius. And so while, and I should say, that I didn't check who wrote this libretto, but the whole construction of this piece was marvelous, except it went on a little bit too long. And the final scene was of its time. But the music from minute to minute was engaging and, to an untrained ear, flawless. And that cannot be said about a lot of works. The only element lacking with the comparison to Mozart is that there's not a lot that is just memorable. And I think that is the missing element, what sets a Mozart or a Verdi head and shoulders above the rest of their peers. Just the fact that they have little catchy bits that stick in the memory. But based upon this play, and it was probably superior to some of the zarzuelas that I remember doing, and definitely superior to a lot of the other light operas that I've seen and have gotten to see over the years in Chicago. In fact, just this past summer, we saw Pagliacci. I forget who did it. And I think it was a pretty poor production, but Salieri was much better. This whole work as a cohesive whole was much better than Pagliacci. And so it just reinforces my love for this great city of Chicago, which Donald Trump denigrates and which his MAGA cohort seems dreadfully afraid of. And I think the reason that they want to decimate culture is because they are afraid of questions that do not have one single answer. They want to decimate culture because they want somebody to tell them how to think about everything, and even more than that, how to feel. And the human mind and the human heart do not work that way. And I think when one has exposure to these various products of human genius, it becomes clear. And the more exposure one has, the more one understands that. I would hate to leave Chicago, but I recognize that the opportunities here just for immersion in all of these riches of the Western tradition, this great opportunity is unique, and people have always gravitated to Chicago and other cities of its ilk just for that reason. I remember years ago, and I probably said this, we went to Frank Lloyd Wright's Taliesin, the one in Wisconsin, and in the gift shop there was a young woman selling stuff, and we talked a little bit, and I mentioned that I was from Chicago, and she stopped and she said, Chicago, God, I wish I could, I just want to go there. I just want to get there. And you realize that's how it is for a lot of people. And I hope that we resist this subversion attempt by Trump and his cohort, and that we come out of this stronger. As far as the rubric Western culture or the Western canon, I don't particularly care about canonization. I don't care how you want to classify things. That's an academic matter. But it is clear that culture, what used to be called high culture, is definitely in the targets of this administration, and they want to usher us into a dark ages of sorts. So these are just disparate thoughts making a desultory video, just pulling together a variety of things. I've seen Shakespeare's play, The Merry Wives of Windsor. It's based upon a character named Falstaff, and he did one or two other plays with Falstaff. They're not exactly the same character. And his play, I really don't care for. I've seen it. But the fact that it has had all of these operatic permutations speaks to the genius of Shakespeare as well. So I will leave it off here. Thank you very much for stopping by my channel and for listening.